Hey there, and welcome to That Bond Show, that nerdy site's newest show and the internet's #1 James Bond rewatch show, hosted by two guys named Logan and Trevor. Probably. Each week, myself and Trevor journey through a new Bond movie from Dr. No to No Time to Die. I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson, and joining me, as always, is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How you doing, Trev?
Doing all right.
You excited for this week's episode here?
Yeah, mostly.
You should be. It's a nice bounce back from the prior episode we had just done.
Yeah.
With the man with the golden gun. We are, of course, doing The Spy Who Loved Me today, the 10th film in the series.
It's almost like an inverse of last week's, where like last week it's like a rough movie, but like Christopher Lee was really great. And this one, it's like, oh, there's a lot of stuff here, and the villain is kind of like, meh.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Yes, this is The Spy Who Loved Me. It is the 10th Bond film. For years, this is what I always viewed as the halfway point in the series. It is very much no longer that with the kind of Daniel Craig era. It was released on July 7th of 1977, which was at the time the longest gap between Bond movies, with The Man with the Golden Gun coming out in 1974. Let's hop right on into the cast. We have Roger Moore back as James Bond in his third time in the role. Barbara Bach as Triple X or Anya. Kurt Jürgens, but I heard someone pronounce it as like almost like a Y, like Kurt Jaeger. Jürgens.
I would read it as Jürgens.
Yeah, it was like Kurt Jürgens. I'm gonna go with that. As Carl Stromberg, Richard Kiel as Jaws, Walter Goldhall as General Gogol, the head of the KGB. Caroline Munro as Naomi, a little bit of a blink and you miss it character. Jeffrey Keane as Sir Frederick Grey, the Minister of Defense. Robert Brown as Admiral Hargreaves. Those are characters that I typically wouldn't have included in the cast and crew because they're pretty minor here. The reason I do is because both are going to be characters you're going to see a lot of in basically the 80s Bond movies. And a little bit of a spoiler for you, Trevor. Admiral Hargreaves, Robert Brown, is going to succeed Bernard Lee as M in a couple movies from now.
Okay.
So that's why they get shout-outs here. We have Desmond Llewellyn as Q, Lois Maxwell as Moneypenny, and for the penultimate time, we have Bernard Lee as M. This was directed by Lewis Gilbert in his second film in the series and first since You Only Live Twice.
It's interesting seeing that in the doc because I was like, there were definitely a lot of times throughout this movie where I was like, I thought of You Only Live Twice. And I think largely that comes down to the production design, specifically of the Leparis ship, was very reminiscent of the volcano lair. And I know you have some trivia that
There's
kind
a whole
of
bunch of
echoes that sentiment as well.
There's a whole thing I have about that as well in terms of my notes that I wanted to talk about. So yeah, I'm glad you also picked up on that. Lewis Gilbert is a director who I think is particularly adept at those kind of final act battle sequences and stage and everything, right? And, you know, he, as a tease for next week, will be the director of Moonraker as well. And that has a similar, if maybe less successful, final act kind of big fight sequence as well. And I think he's just a director who is very good at kind of staging those sequences.
Mm-hmm. Just throw a lot of bodies out there, lots of explosions, have people throw things to help cue those explosions, and boom.
I think I will give him credit too, because I think it's really easy to think, oh yeah, like I just have a lot of people, have explosions go off and like it'll be fine. But like there will be Bond movies down the line, mostly during the Pierce Brosnan run, that I think it can almost become chaotic, right? And I think what Lewis Gilbert does really well is stage it in a way where you're never confused at what is happening, I think, for the most part.
I will say, I was not confused because everybody was very conveniently color coordinated, much like the ninjas versus like volcano lair people of You Only Live Twice. But it was still super chaotic of like, okay, yep, we're just cutting between like people shooting one another, people dying. I like there's just so much going on the screen that I don't know like there were plenty of times where it was like, is Bond even in this scene? What's like, where's Bond at in relation to all this that's going on? Do I need to care what like there was just like it felt like action for action's sake, which isn't bad in and of itself, but it was a lot of like, okay, yeah, this is like it is almost a beat for beat kind of thing of You Only Live Twice. So it is like, oh, the fortress is impenetrable. So now they got like now we got to figure out how to like get into the impenetrable fortress again.
Yeah, that's totally valid. We'll get into that. Blast from the Past section. We've got Jimmy Carter as the president of the United States here. Shout out to Jimmy Carter. Sorry to Gerald Ford, you only had one film. James Callaghan is the prime minister in the UK. I already messaged Trevor about this, but in doing the show notes and wrap up for this, I legitimately thought like, oh, this might be one of those moments like with Goldfinger, for example, Thunderball, for example, where James Bond is just the biggest movie at the box office that year in the US and UK, and it'll be like a kind of a fun one. And to its credit, it is the third highest grossing movie in the world this year, which is still very respectable. It just had the misfortune of coming out in 1977, which was the same year that a little film called Star Wars was released and basically exploded every single box office record en route to becoming the highest grossing movie of all time.
It would be very fascinating to see, because I like Star Wars obviously came out a month and a week earlier than this, and Star Wars, like a lot of its money came from its very, very prolonged run. It very much succeeded from word of mouth. So there's like part of me that wonders if like there was a crisscross of their gross at some point of like as Star Wars was on its way to breaking all those records and going crazy, if like Bond comes out the gate really big and really hot based on the name recognition and then gets overtaken by Star Wars. Sure. But
that's totally possible.
I'm not going to look into that. I'm not going to try and run the numbers
really hard to
and stuff like that.
I don't know if there's a way. Yeah. But yeah, that's a really solid point, actually. I mean, obviously we did a whole podcast series about Star Wars. You can go watch on YouTube or listen to it on a podcast service of your choice. So we're very familiar with that series. And it's funny that this and the movie immediately following this one are very closely tied to Star Wars, obviously. It's kind of a nice little intersection of my two favorite film series. Star Wars came out and ate everyone's lunch money. Paul McCartney, in terms of the What the Beatles Were Doing segment, released Thrillington, his second solo album, which is a purely instrumental album of another album he had done to get it really weird. And Ringo Starr released Ringo the Fourth. And finally, and again, my favorite recurrent segment, I think, from Blast from the Past, the Boston Celtics did not win the NBA championship, but they were the reigning champions this year, fresh off their 13th league title. They'd be knocked out by the 76ers in the playoffs this year and would proceed to go 5 years before their next league title, which was the longest easily at this point in time in the podcast. We're in the dark ages here for them. In terms of the trivia for the movie, I mentioned last week or the week before, I think it was last week though, how there have been 4 times in like the history of the James Bond series that the series could have ended, right? And I mentioned that as Man with the Golden Gun being one of the most serious instances, both with the critical reception that one got, the box office disappointment that one had, and then the fracture of the Saltzman-Broccoli relationship. That all came to a head and led to that lengthy production delay, and there's a whole bunch of trivia on that. So, in terms of that, given the relatively poor financial returns and generally unfavorable response, which is putting it mildly, for A Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me proved to be a pivotal point in the Bond franchise. The project, however, was plagued with difficulties of its own, the first being the departure of the Bond producer Harry Saltzman that we went into last week, so you can just go watch that episode.
It was there was a moment there when I, like in my notes where I was like, oh, yep, Saltzman is just name is gone from the credits, and it was this is produced by Albert Broccoli.
Yep. He is not here. But in Saltzman leaving, there was a lot of production behind the scenes back and forth on the finances of the company. And under Dan Jack's distribution agreement with United Artists, it was required to produce a Bond film every 18 months and ran the risk of losing the rights to the series if it did not, and it very much did not do it at this point in time. Saltzman, however, continued blocking production on another Bond film and refused to allow Broccoli to buy his shares. Maurice Binder and Broccoli held negotiations about selling Saltzman's shares to multiple people. Saltzman finally agreed to sell his shares directly to United Artists so that another Bond film could go forward. Although Broccoli initially objected to the deal, he acquiesced after Saltzman received a counter-offer to sell his rights to the rival studio, Columbia Pictures, which is in addition to what we talked about last week, where he almost sold them to Paramount. Another troubling aspect of the production, and one of my personal favorite production elements of this movie, was the difficulty in obtaining a director. The producers initially approached Steven Spielberg, if only, who was in post-production for Jaws, but ultimately decided against it. And there's some more behind-the-scenes stuff on that I didn't kind of include in the trivia itself. But one of the reasons they didn't include him was because of how chaotic and messy the production shoot of Jaws was, with Spielberg obviously famously going millions of dollars over budget on that movie. And constantly doing reshoots, so they didn't pick him. That was probably their bad. The first director attached to the film was Guy Hamilton, who would have directed his fourth straight Bond film if he had come back for it. But he ultimately left after being offered the opportunity to direct the 1970s Superman movie. Ultimately, though, and I find this particularly fun, he had to drop out of the Superman project basically because of being a tax exile in the UK, which is where the film was being filmed. So he dropped out of that and didn't get to direct a Bond film or a Superman film, which obviously went to Richard Donner, who had his own directorial issues with the series. Iron Productions eventually turned to Lewis Gilbert, who had directed the earlier Bond film, You Only Live Twice, as we mentioned. With the director secured, the next hurdle was finishing the script, which had gone through numerous revisions by numerous writers. The initial villain of the film was Ernst Stavro Blofeld, making a return after Diamonds Are Forever. However, good old Bond baddie Kevin McClory, who owned the film rights to Thunderball, obtained an injunction barring Iron Productions from using the character of Blofeld or Spectre, the International Crime Organization. That, of course, delayed production of the film further. Iron Productions sued them. It was going back and forth. Ultimately, Broccoli just said, change the villain to someone else. They did it. They just changed it to Stromberg, who is just straight up a Blofeld stand-in.
Yep.
It is not even that particularly sneaky at times. It is just Blofeld with a different name and some webbed fingers. Although Fleming had requested that no elements from his original book be used, and indeed no plot elements are, the film characters of Jaws and Sandor are based on the novel characters Saul Horror and Slugsy Morant, respectively, with Horror being described as having steel-capped teeth and Slugsy a clear, bald head. I didn't include it in the trivia, but I do want to give a shout-out to the novel of The Spy Who Loved Me, just for how wild and weird it is, and how immediately Fleming hated it. Fleming never allowed the novel to be sold as a paperback. When he sold the rights to the novel to Broccoli and Saltzman, he only sold the rights to the name and to no plot elements of it because he hated it so much, because it's about a Canadian woman going on a tour, and James Bond only appears in the last act as a character who she falls in love with, The Spy Who Loved Me. Beat to it. It's not a very good book, but really a lot of them aren't. But this is a particularly egregious one because it's not even a James Bond novel. This is also the first time in the series that none of the villains, unless you want to be generous with like the Saul Horror thing for Jaws, make an appearance in the movie itself. That's all the production stuff. It was a mess, but we got it. From there, we have the eyesight of cinematographer Claude Renier was failing during the filming of this film. He couldn't see clearly in the massive and poorly lit supertanker set. As a result, Ken Adams, returning as production designer, turned to his friend Stanley Kubrick. who had worked together, obviously, on Doctor Strangelove, actually, who, under complete secrecy, helped to organize the lighting of the supertanker sequence. In addition to that, Kubrick's stepdaughter, Katharina, created the teeth that Jaws wears in the movie.
I think there was I think, like, watching watching with subtitles, like the song that's playing in like the opening scene with like Agent Triple X or whatever. Like, I think it said like Strangelove plays on the radio or something like that.
Oh, maybe.
So I wonder if that was
cool,
also
like
a sly
homage.
little nod.
Maybe I would like that. The iconic pre-titles sequence ski jump was performed by Rick Sylvester from the top of Asgard Peak on Baffin Island in Canada. The summit is only accessible by helicopter, and a small team of Sylvester and second unit director John Glenn, remember that name, traveled there in July of 1976 to film the stunt. Numerous cameras were positioned around the jump to capture the shot, but at the key moment, all the operators lost sight of him, save one camera which stayed with him through the whole stunt. The scene is all in one take and uncut. Sylvester was paid $30,000. That Union Jack parachute jump would go on to become one of the defining images and pieces of iconography in the series, cementing Bond's nature as a British cultural force for a new generation. The scene received a standing ovation at its royal premiere in London, attended by Prince Charles, and is commonly cited as one of the greatest Bond moments and pre-title sequences of the entire series. Indeed, a Sky Movies poll taken in 2013 named that the second greatest Bond moment ever, behind only the "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die" scene from Goldfinger.
I just real quick on, like, I really enjoyed the pre-credit sequence in part, that sequence in part because I was like, hey, it's the really talented skiers that are skiing without poles and just shooting at James again, returning from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And then, like, I made a special note of, like, oh, like, this is a really cool stunt that they're doing, and then, like, the parachute opens. I'm like, okay, that feels more like that would be an Austin Powers thing than a James Bond thing, because remember, you're supposed to be a secret agent, so
It's
just
a moment.
emblazoning that you have a British flag as your parachute is really stupid for a spy. It's a great visual, I get it, but like it is also just, you're a terrible spy, James Bond.
Production designer Ken Adams created the largest soundstage in the world for the interior shots of the supertanker. At a cost of $1.8 million, the 007 soundstage at Pinewood Studios sought to avoid the volcanic layer problem from You Only Live Twice. That created a massive set that was useless after the shoot and had to be destroyed. The 007 stage would be a permanent fixture and would go on to become one of the greatest and most successful pieces of the Bond legacy, becoming the home of every subsequent Bond film and being rented out to countless other films through the years, becoming a staple and iconic element of British cinema. This, it should be mentioned, is the original 007 soundstage. We are currently on our third iteration because they keep burning down. But nonetheless, Ridley Scott burned down one, I think the original one in 1984 while filming Legends, and then another one suffered significant damage in like 2008, I think, with a sequence from Quantum of Solace. It's a very huge soundstage. Speaking of, those films that have filmed here in addition to the Bond series are as diverse as the original Superman, Little House of Horrors, the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film, the original Mission Impossible, Alien 3, The Fifth Element, the Lara Croft series, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the Harry Potter film series, Pirates of the Caribbean series, and the Star Wars films have all been filmed here. And finally, the last little bit of trivia is The Spy Who Loved Me is one of Albert Broccoli's 3 favorite Bond films, in addition to Goldfinger and From Russia with Love.
Is Little House of Horrors supposed to be Little Shop of Horrors? Is
Maybe,
is that like the British name for it or something?
The thing I pulled had Little House of Horrors, so it could be the same thing, or it might be a different movie. I don't know.
Huh. Okay. Like, if you type in like Little House of Horrors into Google, it definitely like pulls up Little Shop of Horrors as a result, but
maybe.
It might just be like, did you mean this? Weird.
Next up, we've got the 0070-second recap here. I collect this one, like I did it twice basically, but like 77 seconds roughly is kind of where I was mostly clocking it at, which is fine.
Okay, yeah, we'll go 0077.
0077. The opening of You Only Live Twice, but with submarines, opens things up. Afterwards, we are introduced to Triple X, aka Anya, in bed with her lover, before we head over to James in Austria, where his time with a female friend is cut short by a call to report back. 007 is met by some Russian baddies, including Anya's lover, who he kills, before jumping off a mountain with a nice Union Jack parachute. Bond must head to Cairo to stop the sale of state secrets involving the missing nuclear submarine. En route, he meets Anya and Jaws at the pyramids before they share a drink and reveal they know who the other is. After another fight with Jaws, M and General Gogol tell them the Soviets and Brits are working together on this one. They head to Italy where they meet Naomi and ocean-loving baddie Stromberg before Naomi tries to kill them on their return back. They stop Naomi and the two decide to stow away on a sub to check things out. The sub is captured and Anya is taken by Stromberg to his Atlantis underwater station, and Bond and the varied captured crews must fight their way to safety. After taking apart a nuke, they blow up the shield doors and stop Stromberg's plans for global devastation. Bond then takes a new jet ski to Atlantis, kills Stromberg in a brutal manner, saves Anya, stops Jaws yet again, and escapes with Anya. Trevor, what do we get?
It was 79 seconds.
79 seconds. One thing I forgot to include in the trivia fact, which is why I emphasized it there, is
the
apparently
new jet ski. Yeah, jet skis apparently didn't exist prior to this. I saw that
didn't really exist prior to this. Yeah, like, and again, a fun reminder of like sometimes James Bond just really does make things happen. They just like create things, and this is a funny instance of like jet skis were not a thing. So much so that it's called a water ski in this, and then jet skis are around. Trevor.
Yeah.
How many people were killed?
I mean, I'll give you just the overall, because this is another one like You Only Live Twice, obviously, where there's a high body count, but many of them are henchmen. So the overall body count for this per this tally, I'll say, is 147, and the overall body count for Bond alone is 31. But I will pose the question to you: how many of those were like named primary characters?
Let's do it. So he kills Anya's lover, Sergei, I think. Sergei.
Yeah.
So he's dead. He kills Sandor. He doesn't kill Max Kelba because Jaws does. He doesn't kill the other guy because Jaws does. He kills Naomi in the helicopter, obviously. None of the people that he kills in like the cars chasing after them are named, so those are all fine. He kills Stromberg, obviously, in a really brutal way. And then I would say 4 based on that alone, but then like I guess like the one question mark on this list to me is like the captain of the supertanker, because like he dies of wounds from the explosion, but it's like, does Bond directly kill him or not? So like I guess to be generous, I'll say 5, because I'm sure he's got some dumb like captain bad guy name. So I'm gonna say my final guess is Bond kills 5 named characters.
Bond isn't responsible for the captain's death, though. Yes, the captain does have a name or something like that, but he was killed by one of like the crewmen throwing in a grenade kind of thing, rather than Bond.
The grenade, not the.
Yeah. So yeah, it was only 4, and I'm not gonna count that one against you. But yeah, you nailed Stromberg, you nailed Naomi, Sandor, and Sergei. Mm-hmm. I thought either Sergei was going to like sneak by as like, he was just an unnamed henchman, but obviously he is like, critical to Anya's character later. And then the Naomi one is like like Naomi was set up to be like, oh, okay, so like she's going to be the bad guy that Anya fights while Bond is, showing that, like, facing off against
Nope.
Jaws, or nope, just like blew her up in the helicopter, just taken right out. Okay.
It's so weird, and like this segues really nicely into the recap itself. Like, it's super strange because watching it now, like, I remember her because she's like such a, I feel like, iconic piece of this movie, and she's in the movie for like 5 minutes. They basically introduce her character on the boat to take them to Atlantis, and then she drops him back off, and then immediately tries to kill them, and Bond kills her, and it's like all in like a 5 to 10 minute sequence basically, and it's like, all right, like that was it, I guess.
But she shows up in a bikini, which is basically like all you needed to do to become an iconic character in a lot of these movies.
Yeah. But yeah, it was very fun to see just how like brief her time was. Trevor, what'd you think of The Spy Who Loved Me?
I mean, overall, yeah, like I said earlier, like I mostly enjoyed this one. It was like mostly fun. It was a better version of You Only Live Twice, and a less problematic version of You Only Live Twice, I think. And yeah, the only, like, and I mean, like, I guess, because I will say, obviously, like, you love Blofeld in You Only Live Twice significantly more than I do. And realizing, like, oh yeah, like, Stromberg is basically just Blofeld, but without like a scar. And the, like, one of the trivia things I saw was like, if you're only watching it on your TV or something, you might not even catch that he had webbed hands. I didn't catch it until like I was reading the trivia. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense for like why he doesn't like handshakes or whatever. But yeah, it was like, it's fascinating because he's basically like Elon Musk or Jeffrey Bezos now, but instead of having a fascination with space, he was like fascinated with underwater. And like he will be certainly more memorable to me for like his lair, the jellyfish thing that kind of like Atlantis, more so than like anything else. A couple movies from now, I will completely have forgotten this character, especially like in comparison to Jaws, as the menace and the threat. I didn't realize until watching this that Jaws is the guy from Happy Gilmore, or who would go on to be the like the foreman in Happy Gilmore. It's like, oh hey, like it's that guy. Neat. As like, and it's just funny because obviously like my biggest exposure to Jaws would have been from GoldenEye 007, the game, which, not the best graphics and whatnot. So I definitely didn't know, what the actual character looked like. In fact, as I was sitting down, I'm realizing I thought the character was going to be more like Baron Underbite from the Venture Brothers cartoon, where like his whole jaw is metal instead of just like metal teeth. Like I'd basically like transposed those two ideas in my head coming into this. So like, I mean, Jaws as a villain himself, tall, imposing, and obviously metal teeth, a threat, but really only a threat at like very close range stuff. So like there were elements of like, okay, well, they're clearly having to, fudge a bunch of stuff to like get him in close enough where chomping down on somebody's neck is a real threat. And then at other times it's just like, well, Bond's really stupid because he shoots Jaws in the mouth, the one place he knows to not shoot this guy. But whatever. So yeah, that was fun. There was like a lot of the Egypt stuff. I was like, this is weird. Like it very much felt like that travelogue kind of like, hey, like we're going to go to a new place, an exotic place, show off the scenery, show off that we're really there, be at the pyramids, be in some of those ruins and stuff. I think maybe the most like, and it's not even like egregious, but maybe the most like, oh, this doesn't hold up, is the idea that the British Secret Service totally hijacked Egyptian ruins to create like a secret base there in Cairo. It's also incredibly in fitting with the British government's relationship with Egypt over the years.
Centuries, yeah.
So yeah, like I really liked the as much as I've harped on the underwater stuff of Thunderball, I think
I was definitely worried.
all the underwater car stuff here really works and like is like doesn't overstay its welcome. It's fun, it's engaging, and because they're in a car, we can constantly like cut into the car and have Bond and Anya kind of talk or comment on stuff. I guess there was an element of like Bond's just very casual misogyny over Anya driving the truck, or trying to drive the truck that they steal from Jaws. I was like, oh, you didn't need to do that, Roger Moore.
Some of the things I saw, so that those are just ad libs.
Yeah,
like those are just like
exactly
improvs on the spot.
I saw the same. But yeah, like overall, like it was fun. I will say the final fight, like all this, like on the stuff on the ship, like that went a little long, and then also just kind of like sputtered out a little bit. Both in terms of like, okay, they're done fighting, they can't get through this impregnable fortress, so they have to have a very slow, long sequence of like disarming the nuke to get like the bomb that will blow a hole in there, and they do that very slowly, and then they like I made a joke note of like let's see, what is it, in an incredibly dull sequence of Bond teaches typing, Bond and the sub-captain reset the targets with the nuclear subs to fire on one another. It's like that could have easily been handled in a more cinematic, more flashy, action-heavy kind of way than it is. And then we just watched like a couple of like graphics slowly, cross on a globe and hit each other. So like the action kind of falls apart there a little bit, compared to some of the other sequences that we've seen. But yeah, like I liked, like Anya was like leaps and bounds better of was it Tanya from Russia with Love? Yeah. It was, it was basically that same idea, but like this one just significantly better. I appreciated that they had like a rivalry that became like an admiration, that then this looming specter of, we as the audience can put two and two together, that Bond has killed her lover, and when it finally becomes revealed at the end, now they have like a tension and animosity together, but then they're also like separated anyway, so like it doesn't get to play out as much as I would have liked. But yeah, overall, like it was a good fun time. I had a good time with this one.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, I think The Spy Who Loved Me is a super interesting movie, both on its own and then also through the prism of it being a response to The Man with the Golden Gun, right? And Cubby Broccoli basically bringing out all the stops he could, right? Like the biggest budget of the Bond movie yet at that point in time, right? Like huge stunts, bringing back a director who is great at these kind of scenes. Like I think it has the feel of a really important movie within the series as a whole, because I think it is, right? And like this is most people's a movie that they would point to as like Roger Moore's best film, and indeed it's got the best Rotten Tomatoes score of any of his movies, right? Like it's easily the most critically acclaimed of his films. And even I would agree this is Roger Moore's best Bond movie, even if it's not my favorite of his.
Has a great McDonald's tie-in, because Roger Moore obviously dressed like Ronald McDonald there in that opening ski sequence.
I think that's funny. I think that so many elements of this movie work, right? Like to me, this movie is a lot like From Russia with Love. I see a lot of cinematic qualities there in terms of it being sort of a slower paced Bond movie. One that kind of, I think, takes its time developing the threads and has these great action moments still at the same time, and is kind of around this like central dynamic between these two characters, right? Like really my notes were, this is basically trying to hit every Bond movie that came before it that it can. Right? This is the 10th Bond movie. We're going to do everything, right? So like you have the slower paced nature, I think, and
You
kind
have
of
a train
spy elements
fight.
of it. The train fight, that's exactly what I was going to say, of From Russia with Love, right? You had the underwater parts from Thunderball. You had obviously the entire last act of You Only Live Twice, but also again, the opening is just the same thing as You Only Live Twice, except for instead of spaceships, it's submarines, right? Like you had that element of it. You had a love story, like in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, right?
And a mention or an allusion to Tracy and that Bond was once married.
Yep. And so you get into all these things from prior Bond movies, and so I love this idea that they are able to reference this history, right? And really, through the end of the Roger Moore era, it is. I mean, it's not even an argument that like Roger and Sean are just playing the same character. Like this is the same person, right? Like once it gets to Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan, it becomes much more of like this is sort of a soft reboot, like just because of the age factor. But all the way through Rogers, like they're still making references to Tracy. They're going to make more from this point onwards. Like they're still referencing prior things, and it works too because they're essentially the same age, right? Like Roger's a couple years older, so it works like, oh, this is how old James Bond would be if he had kept going from like 1962 to now. And so I like that it kind of helps further those elements of him. I think Roger Moore is really good in those moments where he kind of says, like, I'm sensitive about some things, like that's enough of this, I think, conversation. Like I think he's really, really stand out in this movie. I can't stress that enough. Like I think this is pretty clearly his best movie, and it was also his personal favorite movie that he did. And like, I think this is sort of the image of Roger Moore that most people probably have in their mind, is this version of Roger Moore, who is very much like more tongue-in-cheek than he's been in the past two movies, right? And they've kind of moved him a little bit more away from like the Connery Bond, without him going like full camp yet, like he will go later on. He's still able to do like action scenes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, there was he's obviously in the tux for a lot of it because they get stranded out in the desert in their their fancy clothes or whatever. But then on the note of like the campiness, like he didn't have to throw the out of order sign on the dead body, but he does, and then he has a one-liner on top of that, and it's just like you didn't need to do. You definitely didn't need to do both of them. I would argue you didn't need to do either of those and just went out of your way to make a stupid little bit. Like with the out of order one being the most, because it's like, who the fuck is that for? You're just throwing a sign on a dead body. That's like just desecration unnecessarily. But yeah, like at least there weren't a ton of those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, we're definitely not where we're going to be, a few films from now. And I think he still looks really good, right? Like he's 49 in this movie. This is the last movie Roger Moore will be in his 40s for, which all in the 50s from this point on for his run, which is kind of absurd. But I think he looks so good, right? I think he does look great in kind of that weathered tux that he wears through so much of like the desert scene. Like I think it's just a great Roger Moore performance that is just so strong all around. And like a big element I want to touch on is that, like, first when we start writing the notes for this movie, is I think this is in the run for being the most beautifully shot film in the series so far. Like the most like cinematic in terms of like how they're using lighting and framing, right? Like I think the whole pyramid sequence, right? Like at night with like the light into like light Jaws up, right? Like kind of him appearing and then disappearing and like lighting Bond and like Anya and like navigating through all that. Even as a kid, I was like, oh, this is very well done. And watching it again now, I still thought it was just a really well constructed sequence. There's a moment when they walk into Max Kelba's club where like Anya is framed within like 3 rows of arches, and it looks super nice. Like I think, there is an extra level of polish and production on this movie that there hasn't been in any of the Bond movies since, at least with what Peter Hunt did in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where I think he really focused on those kind of elements too. If not just all the way to like something from Rush of a Goldfinger. Like I think it is just such a cinematically constructed film, and like they've been benefited by the fact that movie making has progressed for 15 years now.
Yeah.
But like just what they did with lighting and the camera work and the framing of things, I thought was so well done.
I was gonna say, like, I took a note that like it is night and day between like the, you know, car chase sequence of Dr. No
Dr.
versus
No.
the car and the helicopter sequence of this one. I thought they did a
Mhm.
great job really showcasing like not only like great action on the roads, but like, you know, the shots where, you know, the car is driving by and the helicopter comes up from the
Pops out.
cliffside
Yep.
out of nowhere and
I
stuff.
had a
like
whole note on that.
they
Yep,
they do a great
absolutely.
job. They did a really great job of like it's fascinating that like they have a stunt at the top of the film where they lucked out by the skin of their teeth that one of their cameras
Yeah.
kept Bond in the shot the whole time,
Yeah.
compared to like how well and how like perfectly timed a lot of those sequences with the
Mhm.
car and the helicopter sequence had to have been. That like, yeah, those were definitely standouts.
I also think, I mean, to that point, like the Lotus Esprit is maybe the second most iconic car in the Bond series after the DB5 from Goldfinger, right? Like this is such an iconic Bond car, and part of that is because like its look is so different than really any of the other cars in the series. Part of that is obviously the element of it also being, you know, a boat basically, right? Like a submarine. And like it just like looking so natural underwater.
Mm-hmm.
But like it is such a rad car. It's such a beautiful car. And
It,
to your Elon Musk joke earlier, he owns this car. He bought this
yes,
car and he's trying
yeah.
to actually make it into a underwater like a navigable thing because that's what Elon Musk does with his free time.
Yeah, I did see that in the trivia too. I had that
Yeah.
thought before seeing that note, and I was just
Yeah.
like, of course he
Yep.
does. Fuck that guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's also fascinating. Obviously, like film being in '77. If you had shown me that car, I would have said that looks like a car out of the '80s.
Mm-hmm.
Like that looks like it has a lot of like the same shape and angles of like the
Sharp
DeLorean
edges
or
of the
something
80s.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
You know, iconically an '80s car. So like it even in that regard feels a little bit ahead of its time.
Mm-hmm.
And I read a lot of the trivia about like it was a prototype that like the owner basically like brought to the lot one day,
Yep.
and then
Yeah.
when everybody was like crowded around it, he just got in the car and left so that they would like be interested in trying to use it. I was like,
Mhm.
very very savvy there. Like with his prototype. So yeah, like a really cool car. Iconic. It is like it does, especially in a 2022 lens, it looks very dated.
Mm.
And it looks like in that like looking at the DB5 Aston Martin stuff, like that car has like beautiful curves that I think like we've come back
Mm.
around to really liking curves, whereas
Yeah.
like the 70s, 80s,
Sharp
90s
edges.
very
Yeah.
much turned into like let's hit sharp angles with a lot of these cars, and that just doesn't look great. Like it
Mm.
looks like, you know, almost like a station wagon or something like that in what I
Mm.
would think of, and like isn't as sexy. I'm sure like for the time it was absolutely like a very sexy looking car kind of thing, but
Yeah.
like I think the pendulum has swung back the other way. And admittedly, Elon Musk trying to swing it back with his like, you know, future like cyberpunk car or
Yeah.
whatever that is
Right.
just sharp angles and looks terrible.
Yeah. It looks
Um,
awful.
but yeah, like it's fascinating just to see, like it was the first one, especially because we haven't like, I feel like we haven't had like an iconic car or something in a
For a
while.
while. Yeah.
Or like a car as the gadget for a while, that like it did feel like oh yeah, we've like we probably went through like all of the 60s without really getting a or like I guess like the most of the late 60s, most of the 70s really, without getting a new car
Mhm.
in that vein. So it is like fascinating to see that kind of like jump of like, yeah, the Aston Martin was like an iconic, and then here you go, you're like jumping up to the 77 for the next
Yeah.
iconic car.
Yeah, and it's rad that the helicopter chase sequence, like you said, I think is so well constructed and so exciting, and I think is aged so well. Like that's my kind of my general takeaway is that like this movie, I think is aged so well, right? Like to me, the biggest weaknesses are, I mean, I think Stromberg is fine, right? Like I think he's fine. I think
Mhm.
again, like I sort of referenced 2 weeks ago with Kananga, I think Roger Moore is a Bond who never arguably gets a great Bond villain. Like I think all 7 of his movies have like good to fine to middling villains, and I think Stromberg very much fits that mold of like, this is a fine villain. He does the job. He's a man who sits down a lot and just kind of talks about the ocean and like, okay, cool. He's one of the ones who have a like classically comically like Bondian plot of like, I want to destroy the world so we're all living underwater cities, and it's like, all right, there's like a lot to unpack in that one, I guess, but sure, that's like fine.
Or you could use all of your wealth to make underwater cities a viable option.
And just encourage people to go there. Yeah. I appreciate that you went this separate route. And so, that is what it is. But like you said, Jaws is so good, and Richard Kiel is like so great in that role. And is so young. And
he's like, it's a mix with him. Like Jaws is obviously like kind of because of his like stature and height. Mm-hmm. But as a result, the trade-off is he's also very like slow and lumbering. Mm-hmm. And when used not in a menacing sense, it just kind of looks funny. And there were a lot of times where I was just like, I mean, he's giving you guys plenty of time to get away. Like he's not going to like, rush after you in any kind of meaningful way. Like you're kind of letting this happen to you and like it works best when he just pops out of the closet on the train or whatever and they have nowhere to run, versus like almost like this weird, like it's set up as like a cat and mouse kind of thing, but it's really just they're being dumb at like the ruins or whatever, as he like slowly lumbers towards them to attack.
Jaws is great, and so like I think that literally works well for me. And then like a major aspect that I think can't be overstated enough in terms of how successful the movie is how good Anya is, right? The original XXX. So get your heart out, Vin Diesel. Like she's great, right? Like if she's not the best Bond girl in the series to this point, she is probably only second or third, right, to like Tracy and maybe Pussy Galore, right? Like she's so good and she's so standout, and she like more than holds her own with James. And
I like that. I was just gonna say I really like that she's introduced as like a subversion. Like she's introduced in the very much like we've seen James in this scenario all this time. So you think that the guy is Agent XXX, and it turns out that it's her. Could do without XXX being her name or her call sign, given the sexual connotations of, a XXX rated kind of thing or something, but whatever. It's Bond gonna be Bond.
It's great. And she's great. And I loved how competitive their relationship is in like the first act of the movie. And I think Barbara Bach and Roger Moore have really good chemistry, right? Like they feel them kind of just like going back and forth with each other a little bit. And so those elements worked really well for me. I think she helps elevate the movie because of it, because it is such a central element of the story, right? And in some ways she might be the last really, really, really great Bond girl for like a while, but she's so good in it. And again, she's a character who they don't do spin-offs, so like I would have loved to have just seen a like XXX standalone movie of just her like doing her own thing, right? Like for the Russians, and like that could have been a really fun thing, right? Like if this movie was made today by like Disney, we would have gotten it probably, right? Because I think she would have been like a fan favorite. And so she, I think, helps elevate the movie, helps make it stronger. The last act stuff is You Only Live Twice. And so if you like the ending of You Only Live Twice, you're going to like this, I think. And I like the ending of You Only Live Twice, and I like this. I think this one is maybe a little bit less sharp for me than You Only Live Twice is, if only because it falls into the same pattern of here's the big climax of the movie, and now we have a thing afterwards we have to do. And I feel like I had never really noticed before that is like a like Bondian trait. And now since we're watching them all back to back and we're talking about them in a more critical lens, obviously I'm noticing it. And like how hit or miss those are for me, right? Like I don't like it in From Russia with Love, for example. I do like it in Goldfinger. Um, and then like
It
Thunderball doesn't really have
I was
one,
gonna
but
say
like
it didn't exist in You Only Live Twice, so like this is basically like You Only Live Twice's ending, and then like 15 minutes after that, like 15
yeah,
minutes
we basically
more.
get Bond and Blofeld actually confronting each other here. And so I think they're pretty hit or miss. I don't like it in Live and Let Die, and like I think this one works if only because it does allow some resolution and it does give you that really intense Bond and Stromberg scene. Where James, like it is easily like the darkest Roger Moore's Bond probably ever gets, of just him like just mowing down Stromberg, very very clearly already dead, and just is still like shooting at his body.
Mm-hmm.
But like I kind of liked, because that is an element that feels very Bond, even if it doesn't feel necessarily like Roger Moore's Bond. That is an element I would see in like pretty much every other Bond, kind of fit in naturally, and just like that. I think that frustration and anger, and so like I liked it.
I mean, I was gonna say like it like this is a Bond we saw earlier just mock a dead body that he didn't have anything to do with the death of by throwing an out of order sign. So yeah, like the fact that he like shoots a couple back through the tube to you know I was trying to come up with like you know, a knockoff name for Blofeld that obviously we can't have.
He who must not be named.
Yeah. But so yeah, Stromberg just like Stromberg shoots like a harpoon, which is also like, it would have been, I think, better if that had been set up as like if he had killed one of you know, the people earlier in the movie using that, you know, to establish that as a tool of his arsenal, versus like Bond's just sitting there and Stromberg
blows his chair up.
Especially because like it ends up being comical in that it takes long enough for the thing to get to him that Bond hears the thing fire and then gets out of the way, instead of being like savvy enough to not sit down or whatever. But yeah, like that's like this Bond, especially setting up that this is the same Bond that, you know, that Connery was playing and that Lazenby played. Like, yeah, this is absolutely a petty Bond. We watched, you know, Bond throw.
We've seen Thunderball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We saw that, like, this is the Bond that would throw flowers on the dead body. Sure. Yep.
Yeah. I like it, and I think it feeds back into that element of this being the more movie that most strikes the right balance of serious and comedic still, right? Like he's more funny than he is in the prior two movies for him, but it's still a serious performing Bond, right? At times too, whether in that scene, whether in the scene I've always really liked of him and Sondor fighting, right? And then him like holding by the tie and like getting the information he needs and like smacking him off and making him fall to his death, right? And like
that, I guess, yeah, that's an even more petty version. Like that's way worse. That's a way worse thing than what I think he does with Stromberg at the end. Yeah,
but I like that because it shows, I think, the ruthless element of James Bond, right? Where like he doesn't need that man anymore. He's no reason to save him, right? And so I always liked that thing. I always thought Roger Moore plays that really well. And so like this is the movie I think where that balance is struck kind of perfectly. And like the next like two movies after this are still pretty good. And then Roger Moore just kind of gets too old and goes camp. But like I think the movie as a whole is really, really standout actually. To me, as like a teeth, where we're gonna rank it in a little bit from now, like I think watch this movie, I constantly kept thinking this has From Russia with Love vibes to me. Like it just sort of has that similar vibe. Like it is not a fast, quick, super expertly paced movie that is just so much fun, and I think it's just kind of hitting everything really well, like Goldfinger or a lot of Live and Let Die for me. It is sort of on the From Russia with Love, like slower paced, more like I'm being a spy doing stuff kind of elements with like a central female character, and just way slower paced. And I think it really triumphs because of that. It allows it time to breathe, and I think it's really great. Trevor, do you have any other thoughts on Spy Love Me before we transition into our plethora of categories here?
I mean, I would just say like on that note, yeah, this I think this has like hints of so many of the movies that have come before. It is
As we
almost like
referenced,
like let's celebrate this is the 10th Bond movie. Let's
Mhm.
like if not intentionally, like subconsciously they pepper in a little bit of every movie, but I think most
Yeah.
notably it is From Rush with Love plus You Only Live Twice.
Yeah.
Like combined.
Which is a fun combination, I think. I think it ends up working really well, right? And it is interesting, and we'll get to this at the final review section too, but it is interesting watching these two movies in such close proximity now as, I was going to say 29, as a 30-year-old adult, where I think it does just do largely You Only Live Twice better than You Only Live Twice, right? Like, if I maybe end up liking the last, like, final battle sequence of You Only Live Twice more still, everything around that, I think it is pretty safe to say, is done better by Spy Who Loved Me. I mean, even including like the love story within that movie, right? Of like Bond and Aki is done better here with Bond and Anya, right? With like Bond falling for a female agent, but one who is so much more fleshed out and well rounded, and who doesn't just die in the second act for like no reason.
Yeah, it's like I would say like in their relationship in particular, we get to see them as like we get to see them kind of in combat as equals almost.
Mm-hmm.
We get to see Anya get one over on Bond with like her cigarette like sleep powder thing, and then they have like a fun little tete-a-tete when trying to like discover the information of like what's the thing in the microfiche, kind of like one-upping each other. So like we get to see her as if not an equal, at least like like she can hold her own for most of the movie, which is like which makes the like the end bit of like, oh, she just becomes a damsel in distress a little annoying. Like it would have been cool if like he walked in and she had already like freed herself or something like that. Like she especially given that this would be a month and a half after Leia is showing herself completely capable kind of aspect in Star Wars there, obviously.
That's a great
so like it's we're maybe not there yet. Like if this movie were made now, I think she would have been even more competent and would have
Naomi
been able
is
to
there, I think, as a opposite number in a much more significant way too. I think if this is made today, I don't think she's just there for like 10 minutes in this like weird second act part.
But yeah, like overall solid film, good fun time.
Absolutely. So let's run through all those fun categories. In Villains Corner, Trevor, where do you want to rank Stromberg?
I mean, Stromberg himself, like, I'd probably put him at the bottom of the list behind Dr. No. Like, there's, like, again, his lair I love the design. I love the look at that. Like the Atlantis lair, like the ship, it's like whatever, it's a giant set, fine. But the Atlantis lair, I love the absurdity of he has like an underwater shark lair in his underwater lair kind of thing. Like he has like an underwater tank in a thing that was already underwater that he like sacrifices that nameless girl to in the beginning or whatever. So like I loved that far more than I like the character himself was of any interest. I think a part of that is because we don't see him like in any kind of normal element. Like we never see him out in high society with his wealth or whatever. He's just this weird rich recluse who spends the entire movie in his like lair. And so he just like he's largely forgettable because of that.
I had the thought while watching it,
which admittedly is also Dr. No is also Blofeld for like a lot of their stuff.
Sure.
But like for this character who is so known because he is a magnet, like he is like you would expect to see him outside in the world. Like
at least pretending to be a normal person.
Exactly. Like he's basically like he is like a inverse Batman kind of thing. So you would expect to see like the Bruce Wayne-ness of this character somewhere, but we don't. We just get, evil Batman.
It is interesting because I had the thought while watching it of the meeting between Bond when he's like in disguise as like the oceanographer dude and Stromberg is particularly strange. When I was watching, it was like, oh, that was so short and brief. Like, it's like, what was the point of that meeting? And then it was like, oh, it's because otherwise Bond and Stromberg would never have met until when Bond kills him, basically. Like, they would never have a meeting before then. That's why it's there. And so it's like, all right, like, we need to have one point of the meeting before they actually have a confrontation. And that's sort of what it was. And like, that's what led to like this weird scene of like, here, we're going to just do a thing with like Naomi for 10 minutes so that we can have this meeting happen in the middle of it, so that these two characters are now like known foes to each other. Right.
Yeah.
But it is sort of a weird movie where like Stromberg is just sort of like hidden away for the entire movie until like the very end. Like he even can't stay on the super tanker for long. Like he's there and then leaves. So like even for the big fight there, he's missing, unlike Blofeld, right? So like he's just like absent from so much of like the plot. So I am not opposed to having him ranked at the bottom. Again, like I kind of said, I think he's largely emblematic of a lot of the Roger Moore Bond villains in terms of they're fine, they get the job done, they're serviceable, but I don't necessarily think they particularly stand out.
Are we going to throw Jaws into the mix?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Jaws, I think, right, is in Odd Job territory, probably.
Right? Like I have him basically right around Odd Job. Whether or not that's like above or below, I can go either way. I don't really care.
There's so many similarities. I mean, here's another. I guess this is. I kept thinking this movie didn't have an element to Goldfinger. It's right here, and a silent, imposing henchman.
Yep.
It's touched on to Goldfinger even, so it's got that movie checked off the list too. I think I personally like Odd Job more. There is probably an element of that is because of what they're going to do with Jaws and the next movie.
You already know what's to come.
Right, so like I don't know if that's like a fair judgment based on the movie. So like I'll let you ultimately pick, but like I think in the same territory here.
I will say in honor of the trivia that I saw of like people being excited that Jaws lived at the end.
Yeah.
I'll say like at least give him a notch up above Odd Job if enough is like done to just like completely make the characters ridiculously stupid.
We're gonna rank him again next week too. So we'll see.
Well, I would say like I don't think we need to do like I don't think we need a Jaws 1.0 and a Jaws 2.0. But like next week we can be like, all right, they did Jaws dirty. Let's move him down below Odd Job next week. But for now, let's go ahead and throw him up above Odd Job.
We'll put him above Odd Job then.
Also, shout out to that just reminded me. Shout out to the like little like Q branch within that like Egyptian ruins secret headquarters that had finally figured out how to unlock the decapitating hat technology that Odd Job had years before. We see that. We see like the weird like springy chair thing that shoots some like basically an ejector seat. I don't know why that's a showcase, but
this is really the first like fleshed out Q-Lab sequence we've had since Goldfinger, right? Like they had like one thing in the background and Man with the Golden Gun, but otherwise we haven't seen Q-Lab proper since Goldfinger, and it becomes much more of a staple again from this point onwards, which I really like. Like I always like to see like the weird kind of goofy gadgets happening in the background while they're talking, and they let Q kind of be Q again after like a couple of movies of him basically just being like an analyst in the field to like talk about gold bullets and shit. So it was cool to see how much of Desmond Llewellyn there is in this movie too. Like he makes a couple of different appearances, which I really loved because he's fantastic.
Yeah.
So we got Jaws as the second highest henchman after Red Grant and above Odd Job now. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 overall behind Kananga, Red Grant, Blofeld 2.0, the Tully Savalas, Blofeld, Scaramanga, and Goldfinger. I forgot we put Scaramanga so high. He really did just get done dirty by that movie, didn't he?
It was, when you were talking earlier of like, yeah, Roger Moore has like good to like fine villains. I was like, I was like, oh, do you really only think Scaramanga is a good level villain, or had you just forgotten that we had put him so high?
I think I just think when I think of that movie, I just think of just like that movie's just not good.
The movie around him keeps him from being the villain he could have been. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the QLab gadgets, it is, of course, the brand new jet ski as well as the car. I think both are great gadgets. I think it is
Also,
probably the most gadget heavy movie we've had from Roger Moore so far.
I was just gonna say a quick shout out to the label maker watch that he has at the beginning that delivers the message.
Yeah, it's great.
While he's like sleeping with the double agent or whatever. Before his ski retreat. But yeah, like the car was again, I think the car was really cool. I absolutely want to give a shout out to the gag of like Anya knowing the car because she had stolen the blueprints of it 2 years ago.
Anya's fucking great. Yeah, she's such a great character. Like the more we talk about Anya, the more I'm like, she might be my favorite Bond girl we've had so far. Like more than Tracy even. Like she's so great and she's so like she just holds her own. Yeah, it I think the gadgets tie into like this in some ways being like the most fun of the Roger Moore movies so far. I think there is just like kind of a sense of like, let's just bring back a lot of these like staples again. And yeah, the QLab gadgets, the car, and the water ski all tie into that. In terms of those music moments, we have got The Spy Who Loved Me, of course.
Nobody Does It Better is
yes.
the actual name of the song.
Well, you were beating me to the thing. I was making it. Oh. Okay. Well, yes, Nobody Does It Better by the legendary Carly Simon. Trevor, how'd you like it?
I mean, there's another one of those, like, I've heard this song. I never knew, like, much like Live and Let Die, I never knew it was a Bond song. And I think even more so, I didn't know it was a Bond song. Even like when we started doing this, I started looking up the movies that we were going to be watching. I was like, oh, okay, Live and Let Die. Oh, okay, like now I can piece together this one. Like when that song came on, I was like, that's the theme of this one. I was expecting a song like called "The Spy Who Loved Me" or whatever, and it's
Bassey like coming back in again. Yeah,
it's a line in the song, sure.
Yep.
But yeah, this is like, and admittedly, I feel like I only ever hear like the first line of the song. Sure. But like it was definitely one of those. Oh, this is another one that like I feel like transcends Bond. Much like Live and Let Die.
It is probably no shock to hear this is one of the most popular charting Bond songs ever for a lot of the reasons you just kind of ascribe to it. It helps that it is.
It's not held back by it just being like the name of a Bond movie.
It helps with the fact that I don't have to do it around like Thunderball. Have fun with that. Make that a pop culture hit. Yeah, I mean, Carly Simon is fantastic. I really, really love Carly Simon. So like I'm already a sucker to begin with. And I think it is easily one of the stronger Bond themes. I think it like fits perfectly in with kind of the more slowed down nature of this movie that gives you time to kind of see the development of that relationship between Bond and Anya. And it's just a jam. And so for me, looking at this list, this would be no lower than third on my list.
For me, it would probably be number 2, because I think like again, Goldfinger, very iconic, but also is only in reference to Bond, whereas this exists outside of like the Bond sphere of things, and much like I want to say Frank called attention to it when we did Live and Let Die. Like they do a really good job of using the song like throughout the rest of the film, I think, as well. But that said, there was also like this exists kind of outside of those music moments, but there were definitely also a lot of like, I'm not usually somebody that pays attention to like the score. Like it's very much, I kind of fall in that camp of like, if it's doing its job, it's not noticeable. It's like it's helping the scenes and stuff like that. Like John Williams music or something like that is, standout. Like it works great as like standalone music, but also like in the moment, you're not like you're not. It's not like saying like, listen to me, I'm music. There were a few beats in here where I was like, oh yeah, that's just full disco that we're hearing like as the music, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's the era we're in. This is some Bond. And it wasn't like, it wasn't Bond in bell bottoms or something like that. I don't know if that's gonna come, but it was very much like just transition music or something like that, where it was like hearing kind of those like disco riffs and stuff like that. I was like, oh, it feels weird. It feels out of place in a Bond movie.
also an element of John Barry not doing the score for this movie because he was also a tax exile. It's going to become a recurring feature. And so he wasn't able to do the score for this one. And so they got like a different composer to do it who did, incorporate kind of some disco elements to it. I like the music. It was one of my notes too. Like, I think the music, the way that it kind of feeds in throughout the film, is really, really nice, actually. It'd probably be one of my favorite scored Bond films we've done so far. So Nobody Does It Better is second on the list. Spoiler, it's going to make a real strong case for being in the top 5. If it won't make it, it'll be just outside of it. It's great. For like days afterwards, I've just been listening to it. Trevor, that takes us to the final review. Where do you rank The Spy Who Loved Me?
It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's very much one, like I when I finished it yesterday, I was thinking to myself as I was going to bed, I was like, where am I going to put this? I don't know. Yeah, well, I wasn't like looking at my list or anything like that, figuring out. It was very much like, well, I like this. Like, it is a better You Only Live Twice. It's like but I think kind of you touched on an element that I think is going to move it significantly more up the list. Is it's also a better from Russia with Love, which I have at number 2 on my list. And so I think it'll go all the way up to number 2 there under Goldfinger for me. Because I like it was a great time. There were elements, like, I don't think any of the Roger Moore stuff has been like top to bottom great, but like Live and Let Die had like really cool elements and
Live
stuff.
and Let Die is easily my second favorite performance of his.
And this, like, villain aside, I thought was a step up in so many other aspects. So like,
sure,
I wish, like I said kind of at the top, like this was almost an inverse of the last one, where like if we'd had Christopher Lee in this one instead of in the last one, this could have been like, it could have made a case for like going up against Goldfinger kind of thing. But as it is, like and I think there's also an element of like, we're very far from Russia with Love now. That was like 2 months ago almost when we watched it at this point, probably. Or I mean, it probably was 2 months ago. And so like I'm trying to remember like why I loved it so much, or why it has been like continued to be ranked so high. And so the fact that I can like very easily and clearly point to this and be like, oh, this did so many things better than From Russia with Love. Like, admittedly, there was also a weird complete non sequitur sequence that had like belly dancing that we didn't need when he goes to meet his like chic friend from college or whatever in his tent. It's like, this is just an obligatory scene. Like to connect the dots from one place to the other, but it's like, whatever. It didn't outstay its welcome like the gypsy sequence of From Russia with Love. So I think this, and obviously Anya being a significant step up over Tanya, I think is absolutely solid in terms of kind of an overall grade. Probably a B. Steady, solid, steady B. Like, I think there are a lot of elements that would have worked even better if they weren't so easily and directly comparable to other things. So instead of feeling like, oh, this is a cool new thing, it's, oh, okay, they did a thing from another, they did it better
from that movie,
but it's not it's not new. It's just like, oh, they did a good job with this. Whereas like if I had seen something new that also was executed very well, I might have, like, even the helicopter thing is like, oh, this is just leaps and bounds ahead of the helicopter scene also from Russia with Love. So it's very much like okay, they took a second pass at a lot of these like elements of these movies, did a better job with them here, but it's not like a wholly new and unique thing in the way that like Goldfinger felt like it was.
I think that's totally fair. So again, to run through Trevor's top 10 Bond movies so far out of the 10, we've got Goldfinger at number 1. The Spy Who Loved Me is now at number 2 for you. From Russia with Love is number 3. Then On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Live and Let Die, criminally low at number 5. Diamonds Are Forever at number 6. Dr. No at 7. You Only Live Twice at 8. The Man with the Golden Gun at 9. Somehow Not Last. And then Thunderball. I was
gonna say, like, that is some wild whiplash of like going from The Man with the Golden Gun as like my next to last movie last week to The Spy Who Loved Me is my next to first movie, my number 2 this week.
100%. In terms of what I think of it, I really like The Spy Who Loved Me. I think it is a movie that I maybe never love as much as a lot of people do, right? Like, I think it is Roger Moore's best Bond movie, right? Like, and indeed, I think we've gotten Roger Moore's 2 best performances and 2 best movies out of the way, Trevor. So he's got 4 movies left. But I think that element is true. I think this is his strongest Bond girl. I think there are a lot of the strongest plot elements here. But I think it is still a slower paced movie. And I think there are elements where I think it does just kind of, it just feels like we get to the ending all of a sudden. I think like watching this time, I was like, oh, we're just like here now. We're like, we don't have that much time. We have to get this movie finished up kind of thing. Like they're just like in a sub to get captured all of a sudden. But on the whole, I think it's great. Like, I think it's a really standout movie. I would give this a B+ to an A-, right? And so then in terms of like my ranking within the list, I've talked, repeatedly about how like my list is basically like 3 categories, right? Of like the movies I think are great, the movies I think are like good to okay, and then the movies I think are bad. And I think this is a great movie, right? Like, I think it makes that like that same kind of caliber of film as like Goldfinger and Live and Let Die and From Russia with Love. I don't think it's as good as Goldfinger or Live and Let Die. I think those are still my 2 favorite Bond movies, right? And are going to be some of my favorite movies by the time we finish this series. But I think it's very close with From Russia with Love, as we've referenced a lot on this show. I think it just takes a lot from that movie. I actually was thinking about it and debating it so much that I actually rewatched From Russia with Love today to like see where I kind of would compare it. And like, I ultimately think that when I first watched this movie, my thoughts were, I think I might like it more. And I think watching From Russia with Love, or most, I didn't finish it, but like, I think I'm still going to be saying, yeah, like, I think The Spy Who Loved Me is a little bit better than From Russia with Love. So like, I have it third on my list. I just think it does just enough to kind of triumph over From Russia with Love. And some of that is just taking some of those same plot elements and doing them better, whether it is the helicopter sequence, which is great, whether it is the idea of having a main henchman who is overshadowed by, or a main villain who's overshadowed by his henchman, like From Russia with Love with Rosa Klebb and Red Grant, right? Like, I think there are parts it doesn't do as good, right? Like the train fight sequence is not the same, or the train sequence in general is not the same as it is in From Russia with Love, obviously, where it's like such a key element of it. And I don't think Jaws is as good as Red Grant, but on the whole, like, I can't even compare Tanya and Anya, having just watched them back to back basically now. It is such a night and day difference. And then I think the rest of this movie just flows along so well. I don't think it has any of the big dips that From Russia with Love has, in particular, obviously in the gypsy sequence. But even in terms of like, I think From Russia with Love really does overstay its welcome by like 10 or 15 minutes. Like after that train sequence, like it just kind of keeps going. And that is sort of my, I think, review in general of The Spy Who Loved Me, is that like, I think this movie is always operating at like a great level and never really dips any lower than like, this is good still, right? It's never like bad at any point in time, which cannot be said of Live and Let Die even, which has like the J.W. Pepper stuff, right? Like, I think Goldfinger is pretty perfect throughout, but like otherwise.
I thank you for mentioning that. Thank God J.W. Pepper is gone. Like, oh, yeah. And we're not coming back to him. Like,
nope.
But in that vein, I as I've seen a couple of moments that I definitely took notes on that I do want to highlight. Not nowhere near like J.W. Pepper levels, but I do want to shout out the guy who was basically the second in command on the first sub, and after like the captain of the first sub dies via like grenade or whatever, this second in command guy is like, leave it to me, sir, and like talks to Bond and like grabs a few guys and they go, and then just immediately dies. It's like, you did nothing. What was the point of this at all?
You did worse, arguably. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a silly thing. I will say, like, on the Jaws train fight, I do appreciate that. Obviously, like, Bond is no match physically for this Jaws, so this Bond has to like outsmart him, and so I appreciate that it turned into like using the electrical current of the lamp or whatever to like shock him and get him in position so he could kick him out. So yeah, shout out to that. Oh, also we didn't talk about this in Q Lab, but I'm pretty sure I was seeing in the trivia stuff, like, shout out to the car being named Wet Nelly as like as like an evolution of the Little Nelly.
Nelly.
I thought that was, and it was interesting seeing that in the trivia, because immediately I was like, oh, that was probably in reference to the jet ski or whatever. But no, it was like, no, that they were referring to the car sequence. Because the jet ski was like, oh, they did give him that in a bag that he has to like put together, and then like jet.
We didn't get a
out
scene
too.
of it this time though.
Yeah. And then also got to give a shout out to the Jaws versus Jaws fight. Of like, as stupid as it was, of like Jaws being lifted in the air by a magnet and then dropped into the shark tank.
Led to a great moment.
Like it paying off with like Jaws just eating a shark, and then like that being enough to let him escape.
Jaws does not die. Jaws escapes. Yeah.
Shout out to that absurdity. But
yeah.
So yeah, those are just a few last little like one note things I wanted to call out here.
I think those are all great shout outs.
And the absolute like stupid final quip of like, oh, I'm just keeping
keeping the British end up.
There it is. What, like, that whole thing is just like, okay, like, very opulent escape pod.
Is it better?
Shout out to Stromberg's very opulent escape pod that comes in quite handy for Bond and his love nest at the end. But yeah, that like that when you were like, hey, I hope you like M interrupting Bond, getting his freak on at the end. I was like, yep, that's there we are. There's that again.
It's gonna become a trend. It's really, they're gonna go back to that well a lot in the next few movies. Really, the next like a lot of movies actually is a well they're gonna really run dry. Yeah, those are all great shout outs. I think Spy Who Loved Me is really, really special and really great. And yeah, easily one of the high points of the Roger Moore era of Bond. Yeah, it's a really special movie in this series in terms of what it did in terms of kind of restoring its prestige. And one of the thoughts I had about the movie actually was, in some ways, this is sort of the series returning to like another cultural high point after like the heyday of like the Sean Connery, like Bond frenzy of like the mid 60s. We kind of hit a similar note again here with this movie, and it is also, weirdly enough, kind of the last great high of the series in terms of like its pop cultural imprint. There's an argument to be made for years afterwards, because obviously, like you mentioned, Star Wars happens the exact same year, and then Star Wars becomes another huge franchise. And then as we get into the 80s, we have like the 80s action blockbuster movies. So in a lot of ways, this is kind of the last great kind of cultural high point for the Bond series until GoldenEye and the Pierce Brosnan era.
Yeah, this and arguably really Man with the Golden Gun would be like, this is the last time like they had the field all to themselves.
Yeah.
And now with Star Wars, that's never going to be the case again.
Yep. And then, Indiana Jones shortly afterwards, and then all the Rambo and everything. Yeah, and it is kind of interesting looking at it through that lens, which I've been doing this past few days, which is like, this is kind of the end of a Bond era in its own right, or like this 15-year uninterrupted period where they did 10 movies, right? Like they were at a more prolific rate than they were ever at otherwise. And most of the movies are really good at the very least, and quite a few are great. And they did just kind of have it all to themselves. Yeah, like they
will never have as big a piece of the pie as they did before this movie.
Yeah, and this kind of hit a similar cultural high point I think the series hadn't had since the 60s with Sean Connery, and it won't see it again until kind of the Bond frenzy that gets swept up in the 90s with Pierce Brosnan and obviously GoldenEye the game as well. I also made some changes to my rankings, so it's not the same. So we are going to run through my list as well as I've continued to debate the 4 movies in that good to okay range. I've decided to commit to a change for at least one episode. So after From Russia with Love in 4th, I then have On Her Majesty's Secret Service in 5th, Thunderball in 6th, Dr. No in 7th, and then You Only Live Twice in 8th, with Diamonds Are Forever in 9th, and Man with a Golden Gun being in 10th, and making a really strong case for being my least favorite Bond movie. I feel pretty okay with that list right now. I still might ultimately bring Dr. No up more.
I was gonna say I couldn't even tell you what you changed.
I basically dropped You Only Live Twice. It was originally right after From Russia with Love, and so I dropped that 4 spots, I guess. And then I raised On Her Majesty's Secret Service up a spot then from that.
That's especially like knowing your like childhood love of You Only Live Twice, seeing it that low on your list is like unheard of to me.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was my childhood favorite movie for years, and then once the Craig era started, I kind of started to like view things a little bit differently, and certainly after Skyfall. But like, there are just so many elements of the movie that do not work, and I think it is the movie in my favorite Bond actor's performance, right? Like the Bond that I love more than the other, and Sean Connery, where like it is clear he is just done with that role, right? Like even in Diamonds Are Forever, where he's largely there because of a paycheck, he also still seems to at least be having fun with it, right? Again, and that is just not the case. Like he's just so clearly burnt out, I think, in You Only Live Twice, and it is increasingly hard to not notice that. Like there are just whole scenes where he's just like disengaged, that you don't even have that element of it, right? And I wrote in my review that went live, as we record this peek behind the curtain this past weekend on her, or I guess 2 weeks ago for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Within that, I had kind of a discussion of, can a Bond movie be great if Bond is not great? And I largely hew to the line of thinking of no, right? Like James Bond needs to be great for the movie to be great. And he's just not great in that movie. And so I just feel like Dr. No and Thunderball he's stronger in, there are stronger elements of in. And again, as I wrote in my review for On Her Majesty's Secret Service, I think On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a good movie with a, key defect at its heart in Lazenby's performance. I don't like Lazenby really at all. And that obviously helps why it's only so high. But to me, this is ranking, these are the best to worst Bond movies. And I think On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a good movie. These are not the list of which movies I most want to rewatch, right? Where it would be much lower. Like, I would pick pretty much all the movies on this list probably other than The Man with the Golden Gun and maybe Diamonds. I'd rather watch other than On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but I think it's better than some of them. And so for me, it is at 5th for right now. Maybe next week I'll bump Thunderball and Dr. No up and it'll be different. But for right now, that is my ranking of the Bond movies. And that's the show. Thank you for listening. If you like,
real quick, I was
breaking news.
As you were doing that, I'm kind of looking at my list and I'm like, Moore has a better track record for me at this point than Connery ultimately did. Of Moore's 3 movies, 2 of his are in like the top tier upper echelon of my list versus like Man with the Golden Gun being at the bottom. Whereas only 2 of Connery's are up for me as well, but he has 4 that are in like the lower tier of my list. So like if
right now,
based on how you've kind of posed it, I fully expect that ratio to start switching, more negatively for more moving forward. But like if we were to revisit the Bond on Bond segment or whatever that you kind of introduce when we have a new Bond come in, like I would look at this and be like, Moore might have overpassed Connery for me right now.
Sure.
If he starts dipping, then yeah, it's gonna be. But yeah, I because right now, based on the movies I've seen, I like Moore in more of his movies than I don't. Versus Connery, I only like in a couple of his movies versus a few of them are much rougher. So yeah.
It's interesting. I think for at least like the first half of his run, Roger Moore maybe that's a little mean, I guess, but like there's an element of like the opposite of what happened with Pierce Brosnan, who I think legitimately has a case to be made of like Pierce Brosnan is the best Bond of any of the Bonds, but is just saddled with, aside from GoldenEye, movies that don't kind of live up to him.
Yeah.
And I think there's an element for me of Roger Moore kind of having the opposite end, where like Roger Moore is good. I think he's great in this movie. I think he really is really good in Spy Who Loved Me. But in a lot of his movies, I think he's kind of okay. But his movies are still fun. So he's kind of got that element to him. For me, right, like after their first three movies, it's different for me because I think Sean Connery's first three movies are maybe the best like 3-movie run of any Bond actor, right? Because even though I have like my issues with Dr. No, like I still think it's a good movie, right? And then From Russia, Love, and Goldfinger, obviously great. It's sort of what happens after there where it gets a bit shakier. And it's similar for Roger Moore as well. I actually think, now that you kind of brought this up,
I mean, like we're both kind of in the same boat. Like our top 5 is two Connery, 2 Moore, and Lazenby. Like,
sure.
Like we, do we have? Yeah, we have the same top 5, just like
different order,
just a different order. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of like dynamic of where we are at this point in time, 40% of the way through these movies, 10 movies in out of the 25, of like, oh yeah, like Moore had a like Moore will have more time to screw up his legacy in the role, and like it won't surprise me as the character continues to be too old to really be playing this character.
Yeah. He's got a few movies left before it becomes really a problem, but
right.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, like it's definitely just an interesting, like, here's a weird snapshot of like what our list.
That's a
like,
great point to bring up though, that I never thought about. Yeah, like in some ways, one of the things I want to mention that like I've been thinking about as I think about Bond, obviously weekly at least, that's a joke, daily, is some people talk about like, the first Bond movie for each actor and like, how successful or not that is. But like looking at most of the Bonds that, got them, there's actually a stronger case to be made that like each of the Bonds like third roles are kind of their strongest. And certainly for me, there's none of that, right? Like Goldfinger for Connery, Spy Who Loved Me for Roger Moore,
Skyfall obviously for
Skyfall
Craig.
for Daniel Craig, and even like
Pierce Brosnan's basically like the outlier there.
It's very divisive. That's what I was gonna say. It's very divisive. I will acknowledge it for all the Bond fans that watch this episode. But like, I think The Word Is Not Enough is fucking fun as hell. Like, does that movie have problems? Yeah, Denise Richards. But like, it's really fun. Like, and I know that that's not a popular take. Like, people really do not like the movie. But like, I think Pierce Brosnan continued to like have a lot of fun with that role. Right? It's just the movie maybe wasn't as good, but like he's still great. And even Timothy Dalton, who only got 2, like he gets better with each of his 2 movies. I think like he becomes more comfortable. I think, and they let him play a increasingly dark, kind of brooding version of Bond that I think I'd have actually been really curious to see his third movie if they had ever kind of given him that opportunity. So in some ways, I think like that third movie is when a lot of people hit their like stride, and then it gets a little wonky after that. But that's where we are right now for Bond on Bond. These are sunny days for Roger Moore, aside from Man with a Golden Gun. Yes, we will see how it shakes out in the coming weeks and movies. But until then, thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, you can go to youtube.com/thatnerdysite where you would already be on this YouTube exclusive series. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the little bell notification to get notified when new videos go live over at youtube.com/thatnerdysite. We have so many Let's Plays and videos and reviews and podcasts going live there constantly. get a hold of all that good content when it drops. You can also go over to thatnerdysite.com and check out all the latest reviews, features, and podcasts going live over there, including the companion written review that I do for each one of the movies going live over at thatnerdysite.com. For Trevor, you can go find him at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything you want to shout out?
I'll just shout out Logan's companion write-ups.
Thank you.
There's a little like extra peek into the mind, a little bit more focused versus like the very conversational, obviously, elements that we have on this one. But yeah, those are always an interesting little extra element of Logan getting to kind of say his final piece on a thing, because usually, like, obviously we record these and then those are written much closer to when they're actually going to publish. So it's very much like his kind of like final word on these movies. So yeah, go check those out alongside these pieces, these episodes.
I appreciate that. immensely. Yeah, they're a ton of fun to write. And as we kind of get to the end of the series, obviously we'll kind of have written. I'll do a written review of all the Bond movies is kind of my current plan as well, that I'm very excited about. And maybe we'll even get a written review of the Felix watch, because that's just a fun character. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. You can go find me at LeftyLogie, at LeftyLoggy, LOGGY on the internet. I will echo that shout out, of course, and then give a shout out to all of the great stuff happening on YouTube. But this will be YouTube in particular shout out, whether it is the weekly Let's Plays that Trevor does on Tuesday and Thursday, currently going through very dated as you watch this, Life is Strange Season 1. Who knows what it'll be by the time you listen to it. Or even...
On that, I would say a more current, that a series that will absolutely still be going when this goes live is Cameron's Friday Night Dying Light series. You can check that out if you want another YouTube exclusive Let's Play series in that regard, over every Friday night.
I also would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Frank's video he did of his top 10 games of the year. Frank is far, far too talented. And so go check all of that out. And this will also be where I say that I originally had planned, because I had bought James Bond Bloodstone for the PS3, I had planned on doing a Let's Play of it, but the Elgato I have, in fact, can't capture PS3 footage because PS3s have insane security measures, apparently. You have to have an OG Elgato, so I will instead just probably write something up about that. But I have it, and just imagine me playing it and enjoying it. So go check out the YouTube series over there. Otherwise, you can go find That Nerdy Site at That Nerdy Site all across the internet. For myself, for Trevor, for all of us here at That Nerdy Site and That Bond Show, we will return with For Your Eyes Only. Or will we?